Okay, so attendees are beginning to join in, and just as you're joining, I'd like to introduce our first speaker on this panel, which is Simon Beale from Simon Beale and Associates. And again, please think about, for this panel, this is a very technical engineering, petrographic analysis, and our experts from the UK as well. So please think of your technical questions, and Mary and I will be monitoring those for the panel discussion afterwards. Okay, Simon, if you would like to begin, I think it's okay. We have most of the panelists in at the moment.
Lovely. Thanks, Martina. Hi, everybody. My name is Simon Beale, a chartered engineer based in County Mayo, in Ballinaghan, County Mayo. I suppose I'd like to start by thanking Martina, Mary, and the members of the Clare Pirate Action Group for asking me to say a few words today. I suppose I'd like to also recognise the work of the Mayo Pirate Group and all those homeowners and people in Donegal who over the last number of years have been striving to get some proper remediation of the problems that they're having with their dwellings. It's an ongoing struggle, and I think it will be ongoing for quite some time. But I'd just like to acknowledge the work that all those people, particularly the private individuals, are doing. I suppose I'm just going to talk today a little bit about the area that I work in, which is primarily in Mayo, but I have been doing some work in County Clare for members of the Clare Pirate Action Group and Clare County Council, with a view to having Clare included onto the grant scheme. That's an ongoing process. Some of you are aware of that. I think Aidan is coming on after me. Aidan's practice would have a far more national coverage, so I suppose I'm sure Aidan will be. I'm not going to exclude Donegal in my comments, but it's not an area I've worked extensively in. We have done some testing up there for housing association clients of ours, so I am familiar with the issues up there, but it wouldn't be an area that I work in on a daily basis. So my area would be more pyrite than mica and peritite. So I'm just going to share the screen, if that's okay. See if everyone can see this. I'm hoping everyone can
yep.
see it now.
Yeah, you can see it, Simon. Good.
Okay, let me just see if I can start this. Okay. So essentially, as I say, the area that I've been working in the last 2 to 3 years in terms of testing has been predominantly in Mayo, but I have done some work in County Clare as well. I'm going to talk 3 little items today. I'm just going to introduce the damage that defective blockwork is causing to properties. Now, I may be preaching to those who are well aware of it, because I'm sure a lot of people looking at this are homeowners and are very well aware of the damage, but I just wanted to put up some images of stuff that we've encountered over the last number of years. And then I'm just going to mention the similarities between Mayo and Clare. Obviously, the difference between Mayo and Clare at the minute is that Mayo is part of the defective concrete blocks grant scheme, whereas Clare isn't. But there are a lot of similarities in terms of the damage and defective blocks. And then I just wanted to maybe talk about the defective block grant scheme itself, the current scheme, and the supposed new scheme that we're meant to see soon, and maybe some of the issues that I'm discovering as an operative for homeowners with the current scheme, and possibly some potential issues with the subsequent scheme. So I suppose pyrite, I know a lot of you would know it as the mineral that's causing damage to your houses, but there is, I suppose, a technical description of pyrite, what it is and what it does and how it affects your homes. I know the geologists and the photographers that are coming on after me will be a lot more technical in terms of the physics and the chemical analysis and all that happens in the blocks. But essentially, pyrite or iron sulfide is a naturally occurring mineral that's found in most rock types. When some forms of pyrite are exposed to moisture and oxygen, which again, as we all know, is often rain, air, often the air that we breathe is enough to cause pyrite to be activated. A series of chemical reactions occur. In such conditions, pyrite will oxidize to form sulfuric acid and other products. The acid may in turn react with other minerals found in aggregate calcium sulfate in the form of gypsum, may be produced. And calcium carbonate becomes commonly known as calcite, is present in the aggregate. Typically calcareous mudstones, which is the main aggregate source that we've noted in Mayo and in Clare, and is available to react with the sulfuric acid. Gypsum has a larger, significantly greater volume than the original pyrite and calcite, thus growth of its crystals can cause expansion. And I suppose I've just got a couple of images here where you can see these would have come from Petrolabs, who are the geologists and photographers that we use here. And you can see the pyrite sections within the aggregate, and on both of these you can see the iron oxide surrounding the pyrite, leading to essentially the expansion of the blocks, which again forms the grapple. So this image of a dwelling is taken from IS 465, and there are varying types of cracking that will and damage that will occur in properties. And I'm sure Aidan will probably substantiate this when he comes on after me. It's not always all of them. It's sometimes one or two, and they happen in very different ways. I think at this stage we've tested approximately 250 dwellings, mainly throughout Mayo. And I think if it's there to be seen in terms of damage, we've possibly seen it. So I don't know, I hope everyone can see my cursor on the screen, but just looking down, we've got vertical cracking at the corners, a very, very typical signal of damage from pyrite. Cracking under windows, and again, a lot of you, again, I'm not telling you something you don't already know, particularly homeowners. The pattern-like cracking that we can see at various locations on the gable that's shown here, the outward bowing, so which is typically shown vertically and horizontally along the center lines. Displacement around the window and door reveals, that's another common element of damage. Horizontal cracking forming panels, so we end up with these grids or panels on the particularly on gable walls, but not necessarily always. And web-like cracking, which is essentially spider's web type cracking. So I've put up a couple of photographs to show people some samples of things we've seen. These aren't always the worst, and they're not always the most significant. Obviously, the extent of deterioration is only a point in time. These larger cracks that you're looking at here on corners weren't always that wide. So there is a progression of cracking throughout time, particularly with more exposure to the elements. So you can, again, on all three examples, you can see the corner cracking and the movement vertically. Pattern-like cracking, these two examples that are on my screen at the minute, both of these have actually been highlighted with a marker physically on the walls. That was as a result of applications to Mayo County Council, in which further information was subsequently requested from the homeowners saying that there was no cracking on these houses. So what you can see there is cracking that has actually been highlighted with a marker, because sometimes it's very difficult to see all of this cracking from a distance or even to capture in a photograph. So I think that's quite clear. Bowing of the external leaf. On the left-hand side, I know it's on a corner, but you can see from where the level is being held, the amount of movement on the left-hand photograph. On the one on the right is more evident from the shadows. You can see the bowing, particularly along this horizontal line here and the vertical line. Again, not all homes will show all of these. This is window and door reveal displacement. So again, you can see the movement away from the door frame, and on the next picture, the same. I think it's about 10 millimeters there. Horizontal cracking forming panels. This is a picture of a gable of a house that I had to climb a tree to get. This is also a dwelling that Mayo County Council wrote back to the homeowner, which subsequently the letter was passed to ourselves, that said there was no pattern cracking evident. These cracks are not marked with anything. This is just rain and moisture lying in the cracks. But I think you'll agree, quite evident that there's a pattern cracking on the gable of that dwelling. Web-like cracking, again, this can be a bit generic. I mean, there are plenty of dwellings with web-like cracking that have got nothing to do with defective blocks. In these instances, there are. You can see the algae buildup in some of the cracking, which sometimes makes it look worse than it actually is. But in these instances, in both, you can see that web-like cracking. So I suppose, having reviewed a number of houses in Mayo, when we were asked by Martina and members of the Clare Action Group to inspect a few houses in Clare, we did so, and have subsequently done a few more for Clare County Council. And I just wanted to show some of the similarities in images, and then we'll talk about later on some of the similarities in other aspects. So again, web-like cracking, you can see house in Clare, house in Mayo, very, very similar. Pattern cracking, again, you know, it's a very common thread that these houses eventually, as the damage increases to the property, the cracks become more and more alike. Vertical cracking here on the corners, again, one in Clare, one in Mayo, particularly bad in this one in Clare. So just having tested in both counties, and Petrolab's having helped, I've just extracted a couple of paragraphs from reports that have come in from the laboratories in relation to the comparison to both. One says it looks like the samples of County Clare are composed of the same, very similar phosphorus and potentially pyriferous black limestone as the samples from County Mayo. We didn't notice any noticeable differences between these samples during the preliminary macroscopic observations. And then, you know, again, a further paragraph from one of the geologists. I went through all of these reports, and it looks like the material used for concrete in both counties was similar. The aggregate appears to be the same. There were a few reports with additional fine aggregate, example beach sand, but it looks like there was no major difference in reports from both County Mayo and County Clare. So I suppose the physical evidence from both counties are similar. The geological evidence is similar. So I suppose the question then arises is, why are both not on the defective blockwork scheme? And I suppose that's what the people of Clare are looking to achieve. The people of Mayo are luckily on that in Donegal, although some of those would have plenty of issues with the scheme in its current form. And that's what we've been assisting with Clare County Council trying to achieve. We did submit reports to the department with Clare County Council, which showed the evidence of pyrite in the blockwork as per IS 465. We were then subsequently asked to show more evidence and specific visual evidence of secondary mineral production. This required significantly more extensive testing than is required under IS 465, but it was completed. And we were able to, I think recently, through Clare County Council, submit to the department evidence of that secondary mineral production within all of the samples that we tested. So I suppose I just wanted to then have a quick chat about the scheme itself, the current scheme. So the current scheme basically has 3 stages of from start to finish. The first one is confirmation of eligibility. You get your report done by your chartered engineer, your IS 465 registered chartered engineer. I think the very important 2 words in all of these 3 stages that you'll see on the screen is if satisfied the local authority, if satisfied the local authority, and if satisfied the local authority. And that seems to be where the scheme is breaking down at the moment. The local authority are, I suppose, struggling on occasion to become satisfied with the evidence, even though the evidence is the same for each IS 465 report. The depth and level of the evidence submitted is the same, but we have found as time has progressed, it's getting more and more difficult to become eligible onto the scheme. There's just a couple of things on the current scheme that I wanted to talk about. So timescales for stage 1 and 2. Initially, when the scheme commenced, we found that applicants were being corresponded back with within kind of 6 to 8 weeks in Mayo. That has now gone out to 3, 4, 5 months. stage 2, which is where the costings for the remedial works are submitted, is taking even longer at the minute, I think 6 to 7 months. So as you can imagine, and I've mentioned it in a point further down here, cost increases at the minute. So a contractor gives a price to complete the remedial works, it's submitted to the council come back approximately 6 months later, and in the current climate we've seen 30 and 40% price increases, which is causing great difficulty for homeowners. And when the figures come back from the local authority, they are stating that they are non-negotiable, so that any increases in costs can't be negotiated, which is causing great difficulty for homeowners. And I think that's why there's been recently a bit of a pause by a lot of applicants waiting for what they hope in the new scheme, when it's presented, will be enhanced in terms of the cost structure. I know the SI have presented some guidance figures based on square footage, which I'm hoping that, which homeowners are hoping will be realised. The difficulty, again, with further information requests on current applications in Mayo, we're being asked to demonstrate this smoking gun or this visual evidence of secondary mineral production. I'll just hold up, and the guys in Petrolabs will notice this because I've taken it from their lab, but there's a typical thin sample that's looked at through a microscope, from which the images that generally present in the reports are extracted. We've calculated that in a typical house, the area of that slide, there's about 1.75 billion of those in a typical house. So you can imagine the needle in a haystack of trying to demonstrate visual evidence of secondary minerals for the department. And if the local authorities are pursuing that continuously, it's going to be very, very difficult to achieve and very expensive, and it won't be completed under the normal regime of IS 465 testing. Another issue that arises its head quite regularly in our office is people looking to upgrade their dwellings when they're completing their remedial works, and the integration with SAI. Now, I think that has advanced a little bit over the last few months, but heretofore, and we have probably 20 houses that are nearing completion at the minute, they've had no, they haven't really had any assistance from SAI, which we would like to see going forward, because I think it's a great opportunity for people to integrate energy upgrades into their dwellings, particularly if it's a complete blockwork removal through demolition. I suppose the new scheme, it's a bit speculative at the minute, so I just want to note that. I think the building condition report that will be completed by engineers like myself and Aidan is going to prove difficult, because I could name 10 properties that we've been to over the years that were completely externally wrapped with insulation by homeowners trying to hide the cracks that they had in their dwelling. So again, it would be difficult to produce a building condition report showing minimum damage thresholds when a photograph of the dwelling will show it in perfect condition. So I think there's almost a penalty going forward for those who maintain and upgrade their houses better than others. And I think that's going to be an issue going forward. And the other big issue is partial repair. I think I sometimes get a little bit of bad press within Mayo County Council, because all he ever recommends is option one, which is demolition. I mean, demolition to me is the only option for pyrite, and it's not necessarily even demolition, it's removal of the defective concrete blocks, and it's removal of all of them down to the foundation level. And often the simplest way to do that is via demolition. I know my office will not be certifying any remedial works that don't include removal of all the blocks going forward in relation to pyrite, because I don't feel we're in a position to do so, and I don't feel our insurers will be in a position to do so. That's the stance we're going to take on, and we'll see what indemnity that the department will provide going forward. So I hope that was in some way helpful and informative, and I think thanks for listening, and I look forward to listening to some of the other contributors as we go forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Simon. That was great. So we're going to move on to Aidan now.
Good afternoon. Hope you can hear me fine.
Yes, I hear you, Aidan.
Simon, congratulations. A very good presentation. And as a fellow engineer, as in a fellow engineer, not a fellow of the institute, but just a fellow engineer. Your comments were very simple, very clearly made, and very, very practical. Just a couple of comments before I jump into my own presentation. The big distinction between mica and pyrite, you're absolutely 100% correct. In my opinion, I've said it at all of the committee stages I've been on. The only solution for pyrite is total demolition, if it is proven that the damage on the property is as a result of pyrite. I don't see any other resolution on that. I do have a different comment in relation to mica. I do believe that some mica affected houses can be repaired, and I've said that all along. We've actually done some. But again, it may not be the solution that everybody's looking for. Costs are going to be the biggest challenge going forward because of the market that we are in. And if the price is fixed now with a particular property, I know builders are not pricing more than 2 weeks, 3 weeks ahead at the moment. So when you're talking about having to go through a planning process, if you're demolishing a house, etc., and you're looking for prices, it is going to be extremely difficult to base it on a determination or a grant that you receive now and be starting your build in, say, 5 or 6 months. Anyway, I will try and share my screen here now. Okay, so hopefully that has come up here.
Yep.
Just to give you a little bit of background, I probably am one of the earliest investigators or finders of the pyrite problem in Ireland. My first concrete block case was 2009, and that was actually in Killaloe in County Clare. So if you're kind of thinking that Clare are also rans in this horse race, no, you were actually at the very front of that race back in 2009, and you were the very first case I ever came across. The first pyrite general case would have been in around 2007. And when I talk about the general pyrite issue, I'm talking about the pyrite in stone material beneath houses themselves. We are the engineers for one of the major insurers of latent defects and structural damage policies within Ireland and the UK. And we deal exclusively with all of their pyrite and general structural problems in both Ireland and the UK, going from Jersey, Donegal, up from Jersey all the way to Donegal. So we have a reasonably good idea in relation to the Mundic problem down in Devon and Cornwall, and obviously now the pyrite problem in Ireland. We wrote the original protocols for the investigation for the pyrite beneath properties, and we also then wrote the original investigation protocols for, let's say, IS 465 in relation to investigation for damage on properties that were suffering from degradation of concrete blocks. Myself and Colin Scott of our office would have been former members or the initial members on the IS 398 committee within NSAI, and we still are members of the NSAI committee for the IS 398. I apologize, I have IS 395 there, but that's just a typo. And we are both on the IS 465 panel as well within NSAI, writing the standards that are there. Now, I know some people might say, well, that's not exactly something you should be proud of, but the reality of it is that we can't give a solution for every single person in every single scenario. We use our best judgment, and that is important to understand. And it was good to hear it there this morning. There isn't a single engineer that is going to sign off on something they don't have absolute faith in, or they absolutely believe from an engineering and a proper construction perspective. I'm a fellow of the Institute of Engineers, and that is actually a recognition by the Institute of Engineers that I know a little bit, or that I have actually been a good contributor or a knowledge maker and provider for engineers in Ireland. And that's what engineers really are very proud of being able to do, is to try and move topics forward and try and give some sort of an education to people on obscure topics. And this is one of those. Okay, in relation to the properties or the county areas that we have been examining or have seen affected properties within, and you will see that I have Donegal out there on its own in green colour. That is because at the moment we have only seen mica problems within Donegal, and they would be from Donegal town all the way up to the Inishowen Peninsula. When we then talk about pyrite, we are talking about Mayo, and we are talking predominantly in around the North Mayo area. The first property I saw in Mayo was actually up in Pullatomish on the coastline. And I did think it was subsidence initially until we started doing some investigations, and then lo and behold, I was able to confirm what its problem was. When we come down, it seems to jump Galway largely, and then we come into County Clare. County Clare, as I said, 2009 in Killaloe was my very first case. But then we come down into Limerick, and there is a wealth of cases in Limerick, and they would be both IS 398, as in stone beneath the floor cases, and also within the concrete blocks. And then we have County Tipperary, County Offaly, and then you'd have what we would always have suspected, Dublin, Louth, Meath. They are quite heavily concentrated. They have a number of cases within them, but they have other issues as well, which I'm going to touch on in a minute. And then extraordinarily, I do say extraordinarily, I have been encountering some really bad cases down in both Carlow and Wexford. And I had a call there only about a week ago in relation to South Wexford, saying that they believe they had a problem down there. I'm waiting for an instruction to attend, and I have gone through it with them. They were probably hoping that I was going to say to them, no, there's absolutely nothing in the Wexford area. But I believe that there are a number of local TDs who have been told that they believe they've got problems. General comments on the application of the IS 465. The purpose of the enhanced government scheme is to prioritise dwellings that are the most severely damaged. Now, this may not be what everyone wants to hear, but we have to be realistic here. There's a limited amount of Simon Beales and Aidan O'Connells and Colin Scotts in this country. There are a limited amount of engineers that actually know what they are looking at or have got experience of seeing this. They may understand crazy paving cracking or the type of web cracking that you would see, but there are a number of possible other alternatives other than pyrite and mica, and we cannot lose focus that there are other potential reasons for this, and we don't just go down a rabbit hole that is called mica or pyrite every time. That's why the government is trying to say, okay, let's repair the most damaged or severely damaged properties. First of all, prioritize those with the available funds that we have, and then over time we can work our way down. Whether people say, but I'm equally entitled, that's fine. But I would also say to people, you're not entitled to anything other than to breathe air. Everything else is what we gain as a right as being a citizen, or what we gain by government schemes, etc. And again, I might be hurting some people's feelings by saying this, but there are limited resources. We have limited builders, limited engineers. We've limited space to do planning permissions, as in personnel to deal with planning permissions, etc. And that's why I would always agree and concur. Deal with the most severely damaged first of all, but not lose focus on the fact that there are other cases that will have to be dealt with in the future as well. The difficulty for all homeowners will be the availability of sufficient engineers with experience and laboratories. Again, a lot of these properties are going to have to be tested. Not all of them, but yes, some of the local authorities have been requesting for secondary evidence of expansion or of the expansive products. And again, in my mind, that is reasonable so long as they don't do it for every single property. So if you have a housing estate and you have already tested 3 or 4 or 5 houses within that, and you can see that you've got elevated levels of total sulfur or elevated levels of mica, and you can see that there has been deleterious breakdown, as in you've got the breakdown of the concrete block purely as a result of mica, but you're not going to see any secondary byproducts from mica because it is a physical breakdown product. Or with pyrite, yes, you will see gypsum, or you certainly can test it from a chemical perspective and see elevated levels of acid-soluble sulfate, which would give you a good, clear indication that there has been pyrite degradation and that expansion has occurred. The geographic spread of cases is far more broad than the IS 398 issue. This must therefore bring into question whether the problem is singly down to pyrite or mica. Now, that's something I'm throwing out there for people to consider. We know where the main IS 398 cases are present. They are present in Limerick. They are present in Dublin. They're present in Louth, Offaly, Meath. We don't really have too many of them in any other part of the country. We really have only seen them in those centres. So if we are saying that there are probably half the number of counties affected by IS 398, which is pyrite beneath the floor slab, and yet the same quarry suppliers will have been producing concrete blocks as they would have been producing stone beneath floor slabs, why are we not seeing such similar levels of widespread damage? And one of the reasons I'm throwing out there as a possibility is just weak concrete blocks. And something else that might ruffle a few feathers is inadequate plastering. Simon and any other engineer will understand and recognize that for counties that have a significant coastal exposure, and Donegal is one of those, and Belmullet and Mayo is another one of those, as is County Clare. So these are all exposed west of Ireland counties, that if you're building a house close to the coast in these areas and would have a designation of high exposure, you must be using 3 layers of plaster. But that is rarely found on the west coast of Ireland. And therefore, if we're not doing the plaster in an appropriate way, are we then saying that our concrete blocks are going to be overly exposed to moisture, to wetting and drying cycles, which some research recently has been showing that just the wetting and drying cycles on their own gives deterioration of a concrete block, regardless of whether it has any pyrite or mica within it. A standard 5 Newton concrete block has a relatively low level of cement within it. And with a large number of wetting and drying cycles, you can end up just creating degradation of concrete block in a similar way to mica, etc. That's why I'm saying that a significant amount of research is now warranted on this issue, especially when the number of possible cases is more widespread than the IS 398 problem. We cannot ignore the simple problem of weak concrete blocks coupled with inadequate plastering on many properties around our coastline. Like Simon will probably agree that I've gone out and I've looked at a number of properties within counties that are affected by pyrite and with mica. And when I actually look at it quite carefully and go and do some testing on the rendering, I don't find any breakdown of the concrete block. But what I'm finding is I've got 2 layers of plaster. The outer layer is the thinnest of all, but it's also the strongest layer, which is the complete wrong way it should be. The strongest layer should always be on the inside. And as you get out towards the outside of the building, the render should get weaker. So it can then deal with the thermal cycles of summertime and wintertime more effectively. That is rarely found. I'm saying here at the end that we are encountering blocks with low durability rather than having high levels of pyrite and mica. I am not throwing dispersions on the findings of what people are finding. But what I am saying is that the mere presence of pyrite, the mere presence of mica does not mean that you have a problem or you are going to have a problem. And even if you've got some crazy paving cracking or the web style cracking in your property, it does not automatically mean that low levels of pyrite is the cause of it. So as engineers, we must be forensic in our examination and understand that there are limits. So if we only have extremely low levels of total sulfur as a result of pyrite or other materials that are within the cement because of the manufacturing process, it does not mean that that is what is the cause of the damage. Okay, general comments again. I'm saying here that the mere presence of pyrite and mica does not automatically mean that a property needs remedial work. That may be something that people don't accept. The presence of pyrite, to say that a house must have no pyrite in the concrete blocks or in the stone filling beneath a property, they might as well move county. So if somebody in County Clare or County Limerick or County Dublin or County Tipperary wants to go somewhere go up to County Antrim where they've only got basalt, etc. up there, but they will have total levels of sulfur that are as high as you're going to find in County Clare. Go to County Wicklow. No, you can't go to County Wicklow because they've got high levels of pyrite, but it's known as fool's gold in the stone that is over there, which is granite, and it shows as this shiny golden material. But that's pyrite. It just happens to be in a cubic form rather than the rhomboidal pyrite that you would find in calcareous mudstones and general mudstones. But what I'm essentially saying here is that there are areas of Ireland where it's going to be impossible to build without having pyrite present in the raw materials themselves. In particular, I strongly believe that it would be possible to remediate low-level mica-affected properties with remedial measures that do not involve significant or any demolition of the existing blockwork. We have seen houses where there are only very, very minor levels of hairline cracking within them. In my opinion, at this stage, subject to further research that is going to be needed down the road. But in my opinion, at this stage, if you can prevent high levels of moisture getting into mica affected blocks, and you then maintain that property, maybe to a more enhanced level, or use some specialist external paint types that are acrylic or polymer-based paints, that they then will prevent the moisture getting in, causing the physical damage that you are finding in mica-affected houses. I know that some people are suggesting that up in Donegal and in some parts of Donegal, that pyrrhotite is found. I am yet to be convinced of that, but I'm also more in particular yet to be convinced that it is as prevalent or is in such high quantities that is giving rise to the damage. And that's why I again reiterate, we need more research by some of the noted bodies. Our biggest challenge will be properties with low strength concrete blocks accompanied with some pyrite or mica, and where we suspect that the damage is down to low durability blocks. And by that I mean, the biggest challenge we are going to have as a society is to accept that some properties with low levels of pyrite or low levels of mica will not be a problem and can be continued to be lived in and can be saleable and you can raise a mortgage on in the same way as Mundic affected houses are. Greatest challenges for engineers going forward. The expected approval process looks like to be a submission to the PIA Resolution Board of the Housing Agency. Currently, building condition assessments sent to the local authority, but they don't have the expertise or the resources to review all of the cases. In my opinion, this requires a centrally managed hub with input from the local authority as necessary. I understand it will be the housing agency that then directs the remedial solution and then requires the homeowner's engineer to adopt that solution as their own. This is a huge problem, in my opinion, for engineers, and I've reiterated this to Damien Owens of Engineers Ireland and to all parties that are willing to listen. I said it's a problem because it removes the engineers from their input to an appropriate solution, and yet the engineers would then be required to sign off on it. Engineers cannot get professional indemnity insurance at an economical cost to deal with mica and pyrite works in Ireland under the current regime, and it would be impossible for any of us to get PI insurance for this type of work once the new regime is implemented. Effectively, what is being said is that the housing agency will direct the engineer as to the solution that is to be adopted, and thereafter the engineer has to take ownership of that solution as if it was their own, implement it, and then sign off on it as being a satisfactory solution. Now, I'm sure Simon would agree that is not practical or not feasible for an engineer. Currently, any demolition of a habitable dwelling requires full planning permission. This then brings about a full review of the current development and may mean SUDs, septic tank, EPA guidelines, road sightlines, and many other normal planning considerations could have an effect on what is granted. The government has stated that it will make pyrite, mica remedials planning exempt. This has not been done. This is a reality and not scaremongering. I've highlighted there at the end. I have had properties where no planning was granted for them because they felt that they were in a dangerous location. And subsequently, the local authorities took the opportunity to say, no, it's in a dangerous location from a traffic perspective, we're not granting planning permission. Now, that is the reality of what we could be facing here. And also, when you go for planning permission, you've got to know the septic tank system. That will end up having to be upgraded to current EPA guidelines and many other issues as well that are arising. And I don't know how those particular items are going to be dealt with by the housing agency going forward. The capacity of testing labs in Ireland and the UK is very limited. Again, this goes back to the prioritisation. This is already known to the housing agency and to the PIA Resolution Board, so hopefully the extent of testing required will be centrally managed. Under the IS 398 scheme, effectively the housing agency will direct if any additional houses need to be tested within a housing estate. If, for example, they don't suspect it is a PIA problem, they will then say, okay, let's go and do some testing. But generally, if they have a number of similar cases already in the state, they will then accept it. As in the UK, we will have a Monday consideration that lending institutions must understand does not render a property unsellable or valueless. So in the UK, you can have a house that has got pyrite within it, down in Devon, Cornwall, and a couple of other areas as well. And those properties are fully able to be sold, to be insured, etc. There is no difficulty with it whatsoever. Patience is going to be a virtue that will be heard for many years to come. Unlike the IS 398 resolution process, the planning and building control process could add many months to the process unless fully considered by the Department of Environment now rather than later down the road. They have said they're going to make the process planning exempt, as I said earlier, but I have not seen any progress in that yet. We urgently need centrally financed research projects to help the professional make an informed decision as to an appropriate remedial solution, if any, and whether any remedial work is required at all. To date, there has been no appetite to move this process forward, despite positive rhetoric from the relevant authorities. Platitudes will not help in this process. And I simply mean by that, and I know that we have some geologists, etc., coming on shortly. I know of a number of proposals that have been submitted by leading geologists here in Ireland in relation to this. And I do mean gentlemen that are at and ladies that are at the absolute forefront from a geological, geotechnical perspective. And every single proposal has been turned down. No explanation, just turned down. So unfortunately, that is not a satisfactory way to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Aidan. If you'd like to just maybe stop screen sharing there for the next person to come on. Now, we have a lot of questions coming in, but we will be holding the questions and comments until all of the speakers have spoken on this panel. Sorry, Aidan, would you mind just maybe stop screen sharing there? Okay, thank you. Okay, so next we have Bradley.
Yes, thank you, Martina. Thank you to Aidan and Simon for your excellent presentations. So my name is Bradley Staniforth. I work for Petrolab Limited. I'm a senior geomaterial scientist and chartered engineer, and I've been working exclusively on the IS 465 issues since joining Petrolab. So I'm going to present today on the petrographic analysis of deleterious materials, focusing on IS 465 petrographic examinations. So briefly, what I'm going to cover during this is what is petrography and why is it a key tool to investigation deterioration. The basic scope and format of the IS 465 testing standard, although that has been covered in pretty reasonable detail by the previous presentations. Then we're going to have a look at the IS 465 testing routes as they are progressed through the testing laboratories. Look in detail at the test suite A, B, and C analysis we undertake at the laboratories. Have a brief look at the main deterioration components seen commonly in County Donegal and County Mow blocks, applicable also to the other counties which are being affected by deleterious concrete blocks. And then I will talk through the IS 465 risk classifications, which will provide based on reports. And finally, there's a few limitations I'd like to point out based on the current testing standard and some suggestions for further research, which will help make our assessment of these materials faster and more accurate for the homeowners. Okay, so petrographic examinations involve the microscopic examination of rocks and geomaterials, describe compositions and textural relationships. Petrographic investigations are a well-established geological technique, and they can be applied to concretes and geomaterials to really bring a detailed microscopic view of what's going on in these materials and how that's affecting strength, durability on both a macroscopic and a structural scale. So these investigations are supported by a range of physical and chemical techniques and analysis. These techniques utilize petrographic thin sections of materials, where the material is first mounted in resin, polished, mounted to glass, and then polished again to 30 microns to be examined under the petrographic microscope, example of which is on screen current. Whilst primarily a microscopic technique, the real art comes to applying this to construction materials and applying those observations up the scale to the macroscopic hand specimen scale, and then using that information to further on and inform engineers on the structural scale. And that's how we use that to predict their future behavior. In order for this system of observation to provide effective sound engineering judgment, it needs to utilize good sampling techniques at the macroscopic and structural scale to then pass back down and up again the conclusions in an accurate way. Okay, so the IS 465 standard, as we've already noted, was based on the findings of the expert panel. The standard deals with the full examination, both the site and laboratory testing side of things, with the laboratory investigation to be undertaken by a professional geologist. The examinations begin with a macroscopic examination and then proceed to more detailed examinations based on the interpretation and risk classification provided by the professional geologist and supported by the observations and suggestions of the chartered engineer, registered engineer. The standard provides a framework risk classification for both site, with the groups 1 to 4 damage, and laboratory, with negligible to critical risk being assigned. A note on the scope of IS 465 is that it is intended for the investigation of properties which have been damaged by deleterious materials. It's not intended for the assessment of new blocks or the conveyancing of undamaged properties, but is being used because there are no standards which cover these applications at current. So up on screen, we currently have the flow diagram through the IS 465 petrographic materials investigation testing. The testing is split into 3 suites: Suite A dealing with simplified petrography, Suite B dealing with detailed petrography and ancillary testing, and Suite C, which deals with detailed SEM analysis. This can be split into 2 main directions following free mica, Donegal type, or pyrite, Mayo type, as defined by the standard. Additional testing can be added by the professional geologist and engineers if required or deemed necessary. So the initial place we start when, with this kind of investigation is test suite A, which is a macroscopic examination of received samples. Once received at our laboratory, samples are analysed by our professional geologists to determine the aggregate types present within the block. If there are multiple aggregate types, concretes can be split into multiple concrete types to make up a representative view of the blockwork present within the dwelling. These checks provide a visual soundness estimation of whether or not the concrete is visually sound or visually unsound. And observations on things such as in situ oxidation, shown in the image at the top right, can be used to assess risk at this stage. So far, Petrolab have examined over 10,000 individual cores and developed an internal atlas of aggregate types and generic risk assessments. Although at current, there are approximately 20 plus main concrete types. Some of these are considerably more common than others, those including the calcareous mudstone lithologies and the pyrite phyllite lithologies. But there are approximately 20 lithologies in general circulation, which we've been seeing throughout these kind of investigations. And occasionally rarer types of which we have not investigated, which we find very difficult to pose risk. So, at the conclusion of the test suite A testing, a risk classification is applied. This is based on composition and soundness, and this provides the recommendations for further testing if required. At this stage is where we split into pyrite or mica routes for further testing. Where multiple concrete types are identified in the dwelling, these may have multiple different risk types, which can make overall classification of a property by the engineer challenging. Additionally to this, there are certain lithologies where variability is so high that we cannot provide a risk classification at suite A stage. These include lithologies such as slate/metapelites, where high quantities of pyrrhotite can be found in certain beds, but not others. Or hornfels within the Donegal region, which can either be barren or filled with pyrrhotite. So there's an example of a sound core which provided a low-medium classification and an unsound core, where fragmentation has occurred during drilling. due to the instability of the block. From the Suite A stage, after the recommendations are made, these are sent back to the homeowner engineer, and then these will be sent back to us to select for further analysis. So if we look back at our testing flowchart, once we have our type of investigation we're following, whether it be free mica or pyrite, the investigation will progress to detailed petrography and ancillary testing in the Test Suite B category. So Test Suite B involves the microscopic analysis of prepared thin sections. This requires the selection of a representative sample to take forward for detailed analysis. This is selected with the engineer based upon the approach that they are taking for the property, whether that be remediation or demolition. And we can look at all of the different samples, air leaf, outer leaf, below in the case of Donegal, free mica investigations, to determine which will provide the best information going forwards. Detailed classifications of aggregate, binder, and concrete quality are then made by microscopic analysis, including the identification of deleterious components of the concrete blocks. This also helps us look at microscopic factors which will affect durability, such as the condition and the quantity of the binder, the interaction between the binder and the aggregate, and the stability that provides, and voidage, including distribution and secondary mineralization present within the blocks. Another key we've been finding in durability is related to the fine aggregate, where things have a notably great fine aggregate grading all the way down. These typically provide more surface area for the cement matrix to bind to the fine aggregate, providing a more stable block overall. On screen, I have 4 of the main deleterious components which are tested for, with the 2 on the left being related to County Donegal type investigations, and the 2 on the right being related to County Mayo investigations. On the left, we have the phyllite aggregate, which is primarily responsible for much of the free mica present within the Donegal blocks. These blocks contain, this phyllite aggregate is very thinly layered and weakly metamorphosed, consisting of very fine micaceous muscovite mica. This is easily sheared and broken into the matrix, where it distributes in amongst the fine aggregate. Just over from that, we have pyrrhotite, in this example exhibiting oxidation to iron oxides in situ. The pyrrhotite is primarily present within the Dalradian metasediments, typically found in County Donegal, and is reasonably endemic to the phyllite lithology. On the right-hand side, we have the calcareous mudstone, typically associated with County Mayo, but also present in County Clare, County Limerick, and other counties that are covered by the carboniferous limestone that covers most of Ireland. These lithologies are highly argillaceous and contain abundant framboidal pyrite, as noted in the image at the end. Framboidal pyrite consists of very fine spherical rhomboids of pyrite. These have large surface area and are readily oxidizable, in comparison to well-formed euhedral pyrite, which is present in many limestone lithologies that are used throughout the construction industry without deleterious effect. So, if we split down to look at the pyrite route, County Mayo type, the main type of deterioration noted in these samples is a form of internal sulfate attack, driven by oxidation of framboidal pyrite clusters concentrated within the argillaceous limestone and calcareous mudstone lithologies. Oxidation of pyrite leads to the formation of gypsum in situ, which takes up a larger volume relating to fracturing and expands along the edge of aggregate particles and internally with aggregate particles to force the binder apart. In these samples, we've often found the influence of leaching and deterioration of the highly porous cementitious material can lead to aggressive forms of carbonation and, in severe cases, tormosite attack, weakening the binder further. Within County Mayo or pyrite type investigations, the key use of chemical and XRD analysis to quantify sulfides and clays is a key part of the investigation. In this case, XRD analysis is used to confirm the presence of sulfide minerals and clays that define the argillaceous limestone and calcareous mudstone lithologies. While the chemical data is specifically the total sulfur, the acid soluble sulfur, and the water soluble sulfur, are used as a way to quantify the amount of sulfide and sulfate present within the aggregate, which is acting as a deleterious mechanism in this case. If we move over to look at County Donegal type or free mica type, deterioration is largely driven by freeze-thaw action. We have an example here of an internal freeze-thaw test where samples were cycled through freezing and heating cycles, breaking down the aggregate cement bond and leading to sample deterioration in approximately 30 cycles. The freeze-thaw damage is activated by the distribution of free mica throughout the binder. It's quite highly water absorbent and will take up the water and then release it during the freeze-thaw cycles, working to expand the aggregate against the binder, forcing the freeze-thaw damage. One of the other key mechanisms noted in County Donegal free mica types is another form of internal sulfate attack relating to peritite. This is not currently covered by the S465 standard down the free mica route, but it's something that's been increasingly noted as a cause of critical samples within the Donegal area. In this case, like in the pyrite examples, internal sulfate attack instigates, leading to the formation of gypsum, forcing aggregate particles apart. Peritite being considerably more susceptible to oxidation than pyrite. Additionally, one of the things that is notable in both types is poor quality block work and finishing. Specifically within the Donegal type, quantities of free mica, high water cement ratios, and water absorption lead to an overall reduction in strength, with the cement content being diluted effectively by the free mica, acting as a non-pozzolanic cement replacement, reducing workability, increasing voidage and bleed, and reducing the effectiveness of the cement binder. The resulting weak binder and the aggregate bond make it highly susceptible to frost damage, internal sulfate attack, and aggressive leaching. Within the County Donegal free mica route, additional testing includes compressive strength, as well as cement content testing by chemical analysis. If we look at test suite C, this focuses on analysis by SEM. On the left-hand side, we have free mica analysis. This is undertaken by elemental mapping of the binder, with the geologist then using image analysis to interpret, remove things which influence this figure. That includes other fine minerals such as feldspars, which can distribute the free mica reading, as well as free mica, which is over 65 microns in size. Anything over 63 microns is suggested to be undeleterious, as mica is a commonly observed mineral throughout these stratas. But it's really the fine mica that's below 63 microns, which has a major issue on the performance of concrete in this application. On the right-hand side, we have SEM analysis to confirm peritite, that is equally applicable to County Mayo and County Clare type analysis, where it can be used to provide detailed confirmations of in situ oxidation. One of the challenges that relates to this kind of analysis is the detailed interpretation required by the geologist in this context, and the large cost and time applications of running full detailed SEM analysis on routine testing samples. So, once the test suites have been completed down either route, it ends with a risk classification being provided by the professional geologist relating to that set of samples. On the left-hand side, we have the risk factor assessment for mica degradation as specified by the AOCA standard, including visual evidence, free mica percentage, evidence of moisture, ingress, microcracking, degradation of the matrix, and microporosity. And on the right-hand side, we have the risk factor assessment for sulfide degradation, which additionally includes the presence of problematic lithologies, such as mudstone, as defined by SR16, the presence of gypsum and secondary sulfates, reactive sulfides in the binder. So, if we take a look at the free mica side first, the risk assessment for mica deterioration, the top number of visual evidence of deterioration typically corresponds to the classification the material is given down the bottom. This runs from negligible risk to low, medium to high risk, onwards to critical risk if the samples are deemed unsound. The main factors that affect this are free mica, which typically provides classification, a large classification in this kind of testing, particularly providing high numbers, with negligible category effectively coming in beneath 1%, making it very difficult to give any negligence within County Donegal. The other influences in this are microporosity, which is typically observed to be very high in these samples due to the increased water demand levied upon the concrete block by the free mica present. If we look at the sulfide deterioration side, some of the main points to consider are the problematic lithologies and mudstone proportion. So this will be the quantitative analysis of the present calcareous mudstones or argillaceous bioclastic limestones. These typically make up a very high percentage of these lithologies, being high-risk classifications. And if we look down at the gypsum, secondary sulfides, and reactive sulfides, this is where the chemical data and XRD analysis of sulfides comes in to influence the classifications. With high classifications provided for anything over 1,000 milligram per litre of WSS or above 0.55 AS. With the proportion of framboidal pyrite identified during the optical examination and XRD examination, and the calculated reactive sulfide content, providing the reactive sulfide risk assessment. There are several limitations that are levied upon us based upon the current standard and our interpretations of the risk classifications. Examination and classification are based upon the received samples. Unfortunately, currently there is an inherent sampling bias, especially noted within Donegal County, where samples must be taken approximately 200 millimeters away from cracks, and with a high sampling bias towards areas which will give good samples for compressive strength. This is effectively masking some kinds of deterioration that we feel like we are not seeing in the samples when related to the structural observations provided by the engineers. The Sweet BC classification is provided, as noted by Simon Beale earlier, on a very small area of material examined from the whole property. Making this representative can be challenging, and the engineers and ourselves work together to try and make this as representative as possible, to provide a classification which is representative of that concrete type within the house. Variably effective ancillary testing from a petrographic point of view. These are asked to be considered by the IS 465 standard. However, these have a variable effect on what we will report, and they're sometimes contradictory to the primary observations. In these cases, we always prefer the primary observations of deterioration that we are seeing. We'll be providing this evidence forward for risk assessment analysis. The county dual type risk assessment is very focused on free mica. Petrographic investigations have long identified issues with internal sulfate attack relating to the presence of pyrrhotite within the Dalradian nest sediments. The high presence of pyrrhotite does not necessarily mean that these, in the absence of free mica, does not necessarily mean that blocks within County Donegal or County Donegal free mica type investigations will provide high classifications, where in reality, if they are considered along the lines of the sulfide risk assessment based on the pyrite testing, these would provide high classifications. There is also a certain limitation between the site and laboratory findings, which could aid in interpretation, i.e. specific localized investigations of deterioration, which could give us better indications of how this material is faring in situ. Finally, I have a few observations based around further research, which is required within the area. The first of these is looking further at pyrrhotite oxidation within concrete water. As noted, pyrrhotite is quite commonly observed within philitic lithologies common to County Donegal. This is sometimes observed to be oxidized and causing issues, where in other times free mica and frost damage is providing the main issues. However, we have seen a large correlation with the number of critical samples which come out of Donegal which are affected by internal sulfate attack for this reason. The reactions related to internal sulfate attack of pyrrhotite still require additional research and classification and inclusion within the IS 465 standard. Another factor is the influence of external factors, such as groundwater and water conditions and sulfate attack within foundations. While this is not thought to be a very significant feature, the influence of external sulfate attack on morphologies which already contain high sulfide and high sulfates cannot be ignored. And this kind of information doesn't currently seem to be recorded and could feed back to us being able to provide firmer and better investigations of deterioration, particularly within foundations. As noted by Aidan, one of the other key areas of research needs to be a correlation between the finishing systems utilised and deterioration. There is a large amount of properties being investigated in all counties. However, the likelihood is that these blocks are present in considerably more homes. It may well be that in homes where finishing systems are finished to a higher standard, and indeed work was finished to a higher standard, that this is preventing these blocks from entering deleterious stages. Research onto homes that have not been affected by deterioration as much could help us to further this area of knowledge. Additionally, there is a need for an atlas of main aggregates and deterioration types common across the whole of Ireland. This is something we've been working on internally, but is taking up a lot due to our high project workload. It's not something that's progressing very fast. Finally, there is a need to update IS 465 guidance based upon the current updated knowledge, particularly on paratype. Since the last update was provided in 2020, there is a wealth of knowledge that is now possessed by members of the committee and other people working within the sector. In that there are a lot more industry professionals working on the problem now than there were then. And this knowledge needs to be fed back into the standard to allow us to provide more risk classifications and provide more streamlined investigations. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Bradley. Yes, thank you very much. So Corinne, are you ready to go? I would just say for participants, attendees, I'm noticing if you want to type your questions directly to any of the panelists in the Q&A box, some of our panelists are answering directly as well, because there'll probably be a lot of questions on this one. So please feel free to type your questions in there, and the panelists are answering them as we go as well.
Okay, can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, how's that looking?
Yep, it's good. Good, Corinne.
Great. Okay, I'm going to have to try and fly through this one, otherwise I'm going to eat into the next session. Okay, so there's been some extremely interesting and devastating presentations from you all this morning, and seeing the volume of samples that we personally receive at Petrolab, our hearts really do go out to you. We've obviously experienced a similar problem down here that we've been dealing with for the last 30-40 years, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So my name is Corinne Garner. I'm a chartered geologist and a senior mineralogist here at Petrolab, and I've been involved with both the Cornish Mundic and the IS 465 problem. So my presentation will be on drawing some parallels between the two. So we've obviously got a rich mining heritage down here for commodities like tin, lead, copper, china clay, and more recently lithium. The mining of these commodities has produced vast amounts of waste rock. There's one of our pyramids there. And yeah, to make use of a lot of these waste heaps, some were deemed fit for use as aggregate in concrete. Types of aggregate we have there, some granites, dolerites, slates, and a lot of beach gravels. But our number one aggregate is the china clay waste, which is accumulated through the extraction of kaolin from weathered granites, which we obviously have a lot of down here. However, metallurgical processing waste was deemed fit for use from the 1900s through to the mid-60s. And our most common types include mineralized granite, prolific hornfells, lead-bearing mudstones, and a lot of incinerator waste. You can see a couple of photos there. The one on the left is the sort of rotten concrete block that Martina was describing this morning. The middle is a typical site visit, which sort of looks kind of like Mundic block roulette. Some of the blocks have it, some don't. You have to go around with a spray can. And the one on the right is a site visit I literally did the other week. The two parallel lines pattern cracking, where the gable elevation is detaching from the house, and at the top the window is bulging at the roof space from expansion. So very similar problem. So what is Mundic? Mundic actually translates to pyrite. It's a Cornish term, so it's theoretically the Cornish pyrite problem. The mechanism is the breakdown of sulfides, generates acids attacking the cement. This breaks down the cement matrix, usually at the cavity first outwards, and then you end up with the complete loss of structural integrity. So Mundic testing was determined by the RICS guidance, which was set up to give a clear classification scheme of pass and fail for mortgage lenders to use so they can determine mortgage security. And Mundic testing is required on all properties here that were built before 1960. Typical test regime includes cores extracted by a chartered surveyor. We do a visual macroscopic examination of 50mm drill cores. We identify the concrete types, deleterious aggregate, and any stable aggregate found at this stage is given an A1 classification, and any deleterious aggregate remains unclassified and is recommended for further testing. The only thing is the debris that you can see there is clearly unsound condition, and it's referred to as Class C condition. So here I've got some comparisons between the stage 1 and the suite A testing. So I know we have long turnaround times, which frustrates both the homeowners and the engineers, and I'm hoping this might help you understand why. Our typical turnaround time for Mundic testing is about 24 hours versus the suite A testing, which typically takes 10 days-ish. Some typical things that we have, we don't accept a chain of custody for Mundic, it's not required, whereas suite A's, you know, we have to take the chain of custody, sign them, stamp them, scan them, send them back to the engineers. We also, I think the biggest problem we have is working with 100mm diameter drill cores versus just the little 50mm drill cores that we use for the stage 1. So stage 1 test, you know, the samples come in, they're logged in, we don't take photos of them, and we just make the estimation and visual assessment. Whereas the suite A testing, the cores are logged in, then we take a photo of every single core we receive, then they're washed, then they're cut for suite A, the core comes back, it's then photographed again, and a high magnification image is taken. It's a big process. So, you know, the handling of bulky 100mm drill cores, it is actually backbreaking work when you have so many. We have a quota to meet, which is usually about 20 houses per week. So at 8 cores a test, it's about 160 per week. So, you know, it all adds up, and then you get these lengthy turnaround times when we get backed up. So maybe, is it necessary to have 100 diameter cores if they're not suitable for CST? That's something to maybe think about. So further testing after the stage 1, then you go on to the stage 2, which is essentially the suite B process, just a smaller scale. We do petrographic on a representative sample, and as deemed by the RICS guideline, we have a 30% deleterious aggregate cutoff. So anything less than 30% is deemed good aggregate, and greater than 30% is deemed bad aggregate. So to put it into perspective, we have the worst aggregate down here is the lead mining waste. 99% of the time, it does have greater than 30% deleterious aggregate, and therefore is Class B as standard. We've also got politic mining waste, which need a bit more assessment of modal analysis and point counting. We've got complex sulfide waste, which are based off percentage of sulfides rather than P-lite aggregate. But at this stage, from the stage 2, you have less than 30% deleterious aggregate. It is assigned Class A2, and that means it is fit for mortgageable purposes. However, anything greater than 30% deleterious aggregate, it's assigned Class B, and then becomes unmortgageable. It does have a potential for stage 3 expansion testing. However, this actually takes a year for the testing. And this is why you see a lot of houses down here that are cash buyers only, because they are not fit for mortgage purposes. So to start with, let's look at the Irish pyrite problem quickly. Obviously, the mechanisms for that, in basic terms, rhomboidal pyrite generates sulfates. Sulfates form along internal cracks. As you can see, there's a couple of pictures here with nice white sulfates forming there. And this causes expansion and leads to loss of structural integrity, hence the debris in number 3. So this problem is actually extremely similar to our Cornish Mundic pyrite problem. This is our typical lead waste. Exactly the same premise. The lead waste is mudstones which bear rhomboidal pyrite. You have oxidation of the framboidal pyrite, which generates secondary sulfates. You can see all these internal cracks opening up near the arrows, spalling into voids. You've also got a sulfide here that's blowing apart, and again, leads to expansive fracturing and loss of structural integrity. So from this, at stage 2, it is automatically assigned a class B because it's due to well-known accelerated degradation. So next Cornish waste we have, which has a higher variation and is usually based on pelitic hornfels. So this is a picture of peelite in the top right corner there. You can already see the brown oxidation halos starting to form. And then at the bottom 2, you've got some higher sulfide mining waste with, chalcopyrite, arsenopyrite, and these are from actually foundation blocks. So for this one, sulfide bearing mine waste is reactive. It's known to cause oxidation, therefore expansion and fracturing. So in this one on the left, this is our typical mine waste, which is a peelite. It does look similar to the phyllites. However, a peelite is formed of fine-grained clays rather than a phyllite, which is slightly higher recrystallization, and therefore you get coarser micas. But essentially similar premise. So on the right, you have the big reddish brown oxidation going through the binder, radiating out from that peelite. You get an associated fracturing, expansion, and again, blows apart, exactly the same premise. So I would say another parallel which can be drawn is sulfide in some of the aggregates from Donegal. So here we have phyllite, which contains pyrrhotite, which is typically highly reactive. You can clearly see here in hand specimen, there's photos of pyrrhotite. In the top left, you've got the abundant elongate lenses parallel to foliation. In the right high mag image there, you've got coarse liberated pyrrhotite derived from the phyllite in the binder. And in the bottom left, you have the actual phyllite rock with the brown smeared oxidation stain, which is, again, common weathering for phyllite. So here's some typical photos which actually look quite similar to the Mundic ones that I just showed you. So this is the Donegal phyllites. It contains pyrrhotite, and you've got on the picture in the left, you've already got a sulfide with a little halo starting to oxidize and radiate through the fractures. And then on the right, you've got an extreme addition with a brown oxidation through the binder, causing the linings to spall around that phyllite fragment there. This is in reflected light, which is the best way to see the oxidation. So on the left, you have this huge whacking great pyrrhotite grain, oxidized, again, blown apart. You can see in the top left corner there, it's extensive spalling. On the right, you have in transmitted light, a pyrrhotite fragment, which is producing the white sulfate that's very common in the Mayo limestones, but it's not typical to Mayo. It is everywhere in reacted sulfides. So this is a typical gypsum spalling into a void and expansion of the sulfides in the Donegal blocks as well. So another thing to think about is the nature of the phyllite and other micaceous aggregates. There are numerous fractures, as you can see. You've got lamination parallel fractures here. You've got the big freeze thaw fractures throughout the binder. Some might say that this causes pathways in the binder for the sulfates to easily migrate. Is that possibly another reason for accelerated oxidation? And really, is this actually more of an Irish mica and sulfide problem? So another slightly unusual aggregate for us, but you can still draw parallels from it. This is a typical peelite from Cornwall on the left. However, on the right, this is a usually stable red and white quartzite aggregate with no mica, but it has been mixed with a fine-grained 0 to 6 mil hornfels, which is Cornwall's most abundant deleterious aggregate. So theoretically, from our ICS guidelines, that equates to less than 30% of the deleterious aggregate, which would be stable. However, these are some of the conditions of the samples received. So you have ranging from intact and nice cores to literal debris. So this one has us stumped sometimes. This is it in thin section. So you've got the hornfels fragment on the left, you've got the little black opaque sulfides, which are clearly reacting, again, producing gypsum, expansion, and spalling into the binder. And the picture on the right is a core that we did for R&D, which is freeze thaw. You can see that the edges of the core have crumbled off, and at a closer inspection, there is a lot of peripheral fractures that are around some of the Hornfels aggregate. So that one actually ended up high risk from freeze thaw. So here's some figures from this particular type, which we did as a research and development task. Mica, 2%. That would theoretically be a low medium classification, if not almost negligible. However, failed the freeze thaw, gave a high result. You wouldn't expect that. Sulfides, 0.5 to 1%. It's not as bad as some of the, greater than 1% to 2% aggregates. So it would technically give a low medium. However, the total sulfur, 0.24, very high. It's another contradiction. And the cement content is abysmal at 4.2%, and the binder is basically non-existent. So what's actually to blame here? There's low mica from quartzite and peelite. There's less than 30% of deleterious aggregate, which by our ICS guidelines would pass. So is it the mica? Is it the sulfides? Is it high fluid flow? Is it low cement content? So is it an Irish mica, pyrite, or manufacture problem? Really, this is hammering home the idea that further research is definitely required into some of these variable aggregate types. And let's go to the Donegal phyllites. So we've got the Irish mica problem, which is usually caused, as we know, by metamorphosed micaceous rock. Typically, this is when the aggregates are using concrete, and abrasion of these causes them to pulverize and fray like confetti into the binder and become widely distributed. And that's what's the main cause for concern here. So one thing you would like to draw your attention to is free mica is anything less than 63 microns and is known to increase water demand and induces fracturing. The best way to see it sometimes is in fluorescent light. So that's the one on the left. You can just sort of see the little black flecks all over the binder, which are frayed everywhere. So a common misconception, which we have seen a couple of times now, the percent of mica of the total concrete is not the percent of free mica. So on the left, you have a typical phyllite aggregate. You can see the mica in the binder with the high color all distributed throughout the binder, whereas the one on the right is our primary China clay waste aggregate, which has literally muscovite everywhere. As you can see, there's literally so much mica in there. We did a little XRD analysis on both of these. So on the left, you have the typical Donegal phyllite, which produces 39.7% mica, total mica, and our good aggregate down here, which is the China clay waste, and that gives 22.5% total mica. Bear in mind that the IS 465 free mica limit is less than 1 to get negligible classification. So as Bradley said before, we determine free mica due to SEM analysis and the image processing software to isolate the free mica. So if you look at this image and then I superimpose the imaging software, you can see the one on the left lights up like a Christmas tree. The red is your free mica, and that derives a percentage of 13%. That is your free mica percentage. The one on the right, which is the China clay waste with the visible mica, there is no mica that is less than 63. There's barely any. So that's 1% and would be given a negligible classification at IS 465. So another thing that we would like to say is this is a summary table to kind of conclude the differences between the RICS classification and the IS 465 standard. I think the main take-home message here is the purpose of the document. The Mundic RICS standard is used for, and it was designed for mortgage lenders to determine a clear pass and fail criteria for mortgage security, whereas the IS 465 is strictly written as a grant scheme eligibility. If the property is not deemed eligible for the grant scheme, then what does the classification actually mean? It was not designed for conveyance, however, it is being widely used for conveyance. And IS 465 is extremely hard to achieve a negligible classification, whereas if you look at some of the Cornish Mundic properties, we have a lot more options to pass the concrete as fit for mortgage. Again, Another thing is the low medium category. What does that actually mean? It covers such a wide variation of values and aggregate types, whereas the RICS guidance is allowed up to 30% problematic aggregate type and, is still deemed mortgageable. Another thing to note is our Mundic homes were built, between the 1900s and 1960s. So, this would put the property ages at about 65 years old. Martina, your research this morning was actually really interesting because you showed me another peak at the 1980s, which I wasn't aware of. So that's another good indicator of, how long these houses typically stand, and it will bulk out your data set. But yeah, it allows more data for the long-term stability of these properties, or the lack of. But a lot of these properties were unfortunately built in the 2000s, which puts the properties at less than 20 years old. And I think that value is probably the most alarming of all. So in summary, there's similar mechanisms for degradation from sulfides. The Cornish Mundic problem, very similar to some of the Irish pyrites and sulfide problems. Another emphasis on free mica as a cause for concern, not just total mica. Otherwise, it would completely write off all of our Cornish aggregate. And I've seen the XRD values used as free mica content, and it's not accurate for that. The other thing is, who and what is IS 465 actually used for? If it's not eligible for the grant scheme, then yeah, what do the classifications actually mean? And finally, the potential excessive testing regimes for IS 465 compared to things like the RICS Mundic guidelines, particularly for things like known high risk materials. The RICS is based on 30 years experience, and as an example, our lead mine waste always contains greater than 30% deleterious aggregate. We know it has the potential for accelerated degradation despite any structural condition it has now, and it's automatically assigned Class B because we know at the end of the day that's going to happen. So to put this in perspective, typical Donegal phyllite, always high mica, it's always got reactive pyrrhotite. Shouldn't it always be high risk? Same with the typical Mayo black limestones, always contains rhomboidal pyrite, therefore always has the potential to oxidize, and therefore should it not always be high risk? So thank you for your time, and look forward to answering any questions in the panel.
Okay, thank you so much. So much information, and I'm so happy that this has been recorded because I'm sure many of us, homeowners and engineers and research students, will get a lot to work on this moving forward. Okay, I noticed questions have been coming in, and Aidan, you've been answering the ones particularly directed towards your presentation there. So just a few other, I suppose, notes I was jotting down. The question around, Aidan, what you said relating to the plaster now, my own question on that, because it's something that has come back, unfortunately, from a particular supplier. It seems to be a little bit of a lame excuse to be blaming plaster work and render when blocks are standing in houses pre-1970 and they've been standing there for 100+ years. So something went wrong. Blocks should not be dissolving like disciplines. Sorry, Aidan, I can't hear you there. You're not coming in.
Okay, that should be working now.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree. And some people are taking my comments slightly out of context. What I wanted to say, and it has been followed up very well by Corinne and by Bradley, etc., is this is a complex issue. And I'd love to get that little picture, Corinne, you have of the man scratching the head, because I'll use that in further presentations. Engineers like to be very clear in their decisions and give definite answers. There is no definite answer here. It's like a Christmas cake mix. We don't know how many walnuts or cherries or flour or whatever is within it when we look at the Christmas cake, and we don't know necessarily which ingredient is the best one within it or which is the worst one when we come to a concrete block. Like when you look at some of the materials that Corinne was talking about there, like 6% of particular aggregate would say that is perfectly safe to use within a concrete block, and yet it's causing significant problems. We have the same thing whereby fine material would make up a low level or a low amount of a concrete block, for example, the fines. And yet we found where very low levels of it, because it contains high level of pyrite, has caused significant problems in concrete blocks. There is no one answer here. And I do know that some suppliers have been going, it's nothing to do with the blocks, it is to do with the plastering. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying keep an open mind that when you're going to a property, don't automatically say it is definitely as a result of pyrite or it is definitely as a result of mica. In relation to the pyrrhotite, I've seen it coming up there. Corinne, I know in relation to pyrrhotite that has been discovered in some of the aggregates, and it is relatively new information. When I say relatively new, it was definitely not something that was being targeted or highlighted when the IS 465 standard was being written. The 465 had a large number of committee members. There were specialist geologists from all over Ireland, and there was even one geologist from the UK there. But pyrrhotite was not something that was being highlighted as a problem, singularly because pyrrhotite is known as being a highly reactive mineral. And when we were looking at the IS 398 standard and all the geology and the considerations from a geological perspective for IS 398, we were saying we're not going to see the byproduct or the results of pyrrhotite because it will have reacted already by the time the rock is extracted from the quarry, crushed. Any amount of pyrrhotite, because the crushing process, etc., is going to have reacted. To find it embedded within limestone particles, I would query, one of the questions I would be raising as an engineer is, well, are we going to be overly worried about pyrrhotite embedded within a limestone particle, which is quite a strong matrix in itself? Or are we worried about pyrrhotite, where it's within a laminated calcareous mudstone or within a mudstone itself? So they're just technical engineering queries. But the one thing that comes out of all of this is we need more research, we need more information, we need more clarification. And that means that the IS 465 committee needs to meet again to give targeted information.
Okay, I think Aidan has frozen there. All right.
If I can just jump in
Information
there
or
real
targeted
quick.
research ideas, then yes, excellent.
Yeah, okay, sorry, Aidan, we're going to let Corinne come back on that one.
Just to say that, I mean, I'm not sure who was on the IS 465 committee particularly, but I mean, pyrrhotite we've known about for years and it has been researched, so it's not like the first occurrence of this, and it's in pretty much 90% of the samples we see, particularly the phyllites, and it is reacting and is not completely reacted unless you have a stockpiled gravel sample. So it's definitely a massive issue, and you should definitely, if the committee is refocusing, should definitely be taken into consideration for sure.
Could I ask you as well, I suppose from County Clare, I noticed this thing thumsite came up in our tests as well. Can you explain a little bit? That is, can you explain, is it sulfate attack? It's fatal in the block, it's irredeemable. And the second question on that is, for IS 465 standards, why are you not stress testing the blocks in the pyrite counties? Because you saw what's coming out of the walls. I know I've dust in my house. How can that be strong enough to hold up a roof? Why is it not being stress tested?
Bradley, can you take that one?
Yeah, no problem. So trauma site attack is a rapid and aggressive form of sulfate attack, which occurs in concrete when it's exposed to high humidity and low temperatures, typically below 15 degrees. It requires an available carbonate source, typically limestone, but it can, in certain circumstances, be very heavily carbonated areas with a cementitious binder. In addition to it, it requires the presence of secondary sulfates to already be there. So in the case of the Mayo or the Clare limestones, these are there as gypsum relating to the internal sulfate attack. So under those conditions, in the high humidity and the low temperature, those materials can react together, and this can effectively degrade the calcium silicate phase of the hardened cement paste, replacing it with a very soft and kind of clay straw brown binder, which holds effectively very little strength. So, I mean, the main places that we have identified this is in very low down external leaf sections, where in these areas it can get cold and it can maintain a kind of temperature below 15 degrees in a high humidity area where there's moisture already present within the in a leaf hole within the cavity or within the cavity insulation, and that can affect, can react and start to form Thomsite attack. Now, due to its effect on degrading the cement matrix, it has a very large effect on strength. However, what measured effect that is on strength of concrete blocks is difficult to determine. There are a number of problems with determining the compressive strength of concrete blocks. It's not done with down the pyrite route. In the Donegal route, it is done, and it is sometimes utilised in a way which I don't personally agree with. But it is clear that it is something that has a very profound effect on the strength of a concrete block. Although, again, it's not typically known for being in concrete blocks. It is known for being in concrete foundations and mass concrete pours in cold areas, which maintain high humidity. So more research is again required on the application of Thomsite attack on concrete blocks. Although it is worth noting, it is not anywhere near as prevalent as the typical internal sulfate attack we are seeing within the pyrite-rich lithologies.
So am I understanding, Bradley, that it's pretty much, it can't be remediated if you have this inside in the blocks, they're turning to...
Yeah, well, once the reaction has taken place and degraded the binder, it's not going to suddenly become an effective cementitious binder again. So take of that as you will, really. It's not something that's going to be, you can undertake a chemical process to turn it back into being a strong block. It has become a weak block and it is no longer fit to be part of the building envelope system. Okay, and can I get an answer, please, on why there is no compressive strength testing for blocks that are turning to dust? No, I believe that's an IS 465 standards question. Yeah, well, effectively, I can sort of answer that as well. The way compressive strength testing is currently undertaken in accordance with IS 465 is of core samples of block work. This is then compared against strengths in accordance with 771 Part 3 of full blocks. Effectively, these strengths can't actually be compared against each other. There is no calculated way of converting the core strength to the strength of a block. Additionally, the high variability of concrete blocks leads you to requiring quite a lot of samples to be able to get a representative strength from the blocks. Otherwise, you don't know if you're at an anomalous high or an anomalous low. If you look at the compressive strength standard which is utilised, which is the compressive strength of concrete cores of in situ concrete, this is obviously designed for in situ concrete, and the ways it is dealt with are kind of applicable to concrete products, but it has not been developed with concrete products in mind. So there is it's kind of the only way of looking at these strengths without taking a full block. But the way some of these strengths are being taken to be definitive, it needs again, it's another point that needs a considerable amount of research to be doing. When we look at them in bulk, which I have been doing, they bring a kind of consistency, but being able to compare them against standards of the time or modern standards, it's simply something that it requires a lot of engineering thought and a lot of assurance that what you've tested is representative to be able to give a firm answer on them.
Mm-hmm. So why are you testing mica blocks and not pyrite blocks?
Currently, that's what the standard dictates.
Yeah, so I suppose that's a question for Aidan O'Connell when he comes back. So we'll just have a quick look here at any other questions that are coming in.
Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah, sorry, Aidan. I think that's a question for you for the IS 465 standards. Why was it decided the mica blocks will be strength tested, but not pyrite blocks?
Effectively, in my opinion, and this is my opinion rather than talking for the IS 465 overall committee, because that really needs to be answered by NSAI. But effectively, what I would be saying is for the pyrite affected houses, there is no resolution, there is no method by which you would be able to say it can be resurrected.
So are you saying they cannot be remediated?
Yeah, I've always said pyrite affected houses, not houses containing pyrite, but pyrite affected houses, in my opinion, cannot be remediated. I've always said that.
But what's the difference there? Like we're not getting into semantics.
No, it's not getting into semantics, Martina. It's extremely simple, but it's an important differentiation.
Effectively, the Donegal houses were tested for compressive strength because the intention was to retain things such as the inner leaves or the foundations, is my interpretation of how it works. Because the pyrite route goes down the route that the engineers typically agree that demolition is the only option in those. It was my guess is that is why it's not been included down that testing route.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, Aidan, you're saying that where we have found pyrite in the block, it's demolition.
No, that's not what I said.
Okay, but clarify, please, because I need to understand this.
There are levels. As I've said, you would probably have to go. In almost most counties in Ireland, you'll find pyration blocks. Certainly in every single county, in every single solitary county on the map that I showed you, there is pyrite in the aggregate within those concrete blocks within those counties. It's an impossibility to find concrete blocks not containing pyrite to a certain extent throughout Ireland because of our geology and our makeup here in Ireland. However, what I am saying is that there are levels of pyrite that invariably will cause damage. And where we have high levels of pyrite accompanied by damage, there is no resolution for those houses. There is none. It is all about the levels of pyrite and whether there currently is damage there or not.
I'm just going back to a comment that you responded to. You may be misinterpreting my comments. Your levels are so high, things being equal, all things being equal is more sufficient to prove the defect causing the damage. I'm simply saying that when we get down to the low levels of mica 2 to 3%, you see all things aren't equal. And unfortunately, we found with County Clare that the level that the department has put us through with trying to quantify this causative link between damage and pyrite, and the causative link between the damage. So this is the language you're going into, and all things are not equal there, because that's going to be something that homeowners can't access. Clare County Council have already put or thrown at least 60,000 in additional testing to try to find something, as Simon has explained. It's how many billions, Mike, of particles of this. That's not going to be an equal thing. So how are we supposed to, if we're looking for, you're saying we all have pyrite in our blocks, that's a leveler as bringing us all back down to a space where we've all got pyrite. What are you speaking about? Because you wrote the IS 465 standard, I understand.
I was one of the authors of one of the participants on the committee that were involved in writing it. There was probably up to approximately 20 people involved in the writing of it. And they were the people from geology, from quarries, from all the various stakeholders were involved in the writing of that standard. Now, all I'm saying here is that, as I said earlier, in all of the affected counties, there isn't a single property probably out there that does not have pyrite within it. Simple as that. It is impossible to remove pyrite completely from the geology within most of the affected counties that contain pyrite. Certainly within Dublin, within Louth, within Meath, and then you come into County Clare, you come into County Limerick, you've seen it up there in County Mayo, you're already talking about pyrrhotite up in County Donegal. It's just not possible to do it. Ultimately, you have to make a decision in terms of, is the level of pyrite so low that it is, and it's within a matrix, it's within a geology that is sufficiently strong and robust that it's going to be able to withstand any potential expansion forces that may arise as a result of a chemical oxidation process. Are we able to say those houses will not be affected in a structural way going forward, or will not be affected at all going forward? That's the question. And that question has been answered by IS 398, and there are properties that are not being remediated under IS 398 because there is no damage, or you might have extremely minor hairline cracking within them that is more cosmetic than actual structural issues.
You're talking about, I mean, my understanding is you're talking about the pyrite heap. So you're talking about a visual analysis, an estimation, so or else core testing, because under the new scheme that's being proposed, we won't have access to experts such as Simon or Petrolab because we won't get past a visual inspection process.
The initial part of the process is still going to be exactly the same as was there before. So Simon and other experienced engineers or other experienced competent people who have passed or gone through the training cycle that is there with Engineers Ireland, if they have sent in a BCA or building condition assessment, then that puts them up into a category saying, yes, there is damage within this house. If there is no damage within the house, they will receive a very low priority, regardless of what the geology is saying, because the emphasis of the government scheme is primarily to prioritize those houses that have the highest level of damage and repair them immediately. That's the priority of the scheme. Then as time progresses and we've dealt with, or when I say we, that's a big royal we for the Irish government and engineers in Ireland, once they've dealt with the most highly affected houses, they will then start coming down, which gives us the time as engineers and as geologists to possibly do the extra research that we need to know where the threshold of never get damaged to yes, potentially get damaged in the future is.
Can I just jump in on pyrite for a minute? So if we're talking about pyrite, one of the main things that we feeds into the risk assessment is the total sulfur limit of pyrite. And the limits on total sulfur relate to the particular aggregate standards which define how much total sulfur can be present within aggregate. So this is guided by ISEN 126/2002 and the additional guidance provided in Irish National Guidance SR 16 in 2016. Now this limits the total sulfur percentage in aggregate specifically to be used in concrete, which is picked up by the standard 771 for the production of concrete blocks as being applicable for concrete blocks. It limits it to a percentage of 1% total sulfur. So pyrite can be present in many forms. Typically, where we're assuming this pyrite may be present in an aggregate particle up to a 1% total sulfur, it will be present in well-locked hard lithologies, such as well-bounded limestones, not the kind of argillaceous limestones we are seeing in County Mayo, County Clare, etc. And it will be euhedral forms of pyrite, which are considerably less susceptible to oxidation and deterioration than the framboidal forms of pyrite associated with the argillaceous limestone lithologies. So this is why across Ireland, which is kind of dominated largely by carboniferous limestones, there is going to be pyrite present in aggregate utilised in concrete and concrete products, such as concrete blocks, that is going to be fine. That's where this kind of testing is important to determine if the forms of pyrite present and the quantities of pyrite present and the aggregate lithologies which are binding this pyrite are susceptible to deterioration, such as those examined in County Mayo, County Clare, County Limerick, etc. So whilst there is kind of guidance that works on aggregate, that guidance kind of in the past didn't particularly feed through to concrete products such as concrete blocks, which is one of the many reasons these products have ended up with high percentage of deleterious materials.
I think Bradley, this is good, and of course we need more research. That level of detailed research is not going to be accessible and available to homeowners under the new scheme because it'll be a visual inspection. And my understanding from Conor O'Donnell is it was somebody that wasn't even IS 465 qualified who was doing the initial threshold inspection.
Can I just jump in there quickly, Martina?
Yeah.
In 2016, I had block strength testing done by MTS Limited, and that was done to an IS 20 part 1 of 1987, and they said my block work was okay. That was in 2016. I kind of disagree a little bit with Aidan when he says that the aim of the IS 465 is to deal with the most degraded houses and that are pyrite affected. It's not. It's a matter of how long ago you've applied to be on the grant and how long the paperwork takes to go through. There are people such as myself whose houses aren't as bad as others because I've done remediation work over a period of 4 years. I have done options 4, 5 already. I have stripped the outer leaf. I have replastered inside and out at great cost. And the IS 465 is basically there to basically back up the councils who are dealing with this. And it's a paperwork exercise. It's not how degraded your house is. There are houses that are falling down that are way behind me. It's a matter of the length of time it takes to process the paperwork.
No, sorry, Conor, I'm very sorry for the fact that you've spent so much time and money remediating your house. The purpose of the IS 46 standard is to give guidance and help for professionals to be able to make educated judgment calls. I'm not saying that the IS 465 is there to prioritize. That's not correct. It's just no standard is ever there to prioritize. It's a mechanism, though, that will be used, I believe, by the housing agency, etc., in order to prioritize the most badly affected properties. And that is the principle behind it. It's not how long you are actually on the list as such, unfortunately. It really is saying that there's limited funds here on an annual basis, and we're going to try and prioritize repairs. That's what the housing agency is saying. That is not what the IS 46 standard is there for, though.
Can I jump in real quick?
It's not there, but it's been used. Yeah.
Just one thing to point out from, again, the Cornish Mundic perspective. As I said before, these houses, some of them were built in the year 2000. We're looking at properties that are degrading 65 years down the line. And it's exactly the same aggregate, and it just takes a bit longer to react. That's all. So something to, bear in mind. It's not degraded now, but if it's got the same aggregate and the same mechanism, surely, they should all be classed the same.
I think just from my perspective, and particularly also in relation to Mayo than anywhere else, where I'm testing the large majority of properties, or where my client base is largely based, there is I would say, a feeling among a lot of homeowners with lesser damaged properties, because obviously there's a huge range of damage, that initially what a lot of those people are looking to achieve from the council or from the housing agency going forward is a knowledge and an undertaking that they will be dealt with. It is impossible, as Aidan rightly said, it is impossible to deal with everybody at one time. There aren't the engineers, the builders, the planning officers within the council to deal with it. It's not going to happen that way. And a lot of my clients would be satisfied to know that they are going to be dealt with. So I probably have 100 applicants who've been in the council coffers now for the last 3 to 7, 8 months, and they still don't know. They're in limbo. They don't know what's happening. They hear all the media reports and social media reports about the new scheme. Are they going to be included? Are they not? Peace of mind is essential here. And I think if a homeowner, knowing that they've got defective blocks, know that there's a solution for them and know that it's coming within, I would consider, a reasonable amount of time, it does satisfy a lot of people. I think that's important to stress, because realistically it's not going to happen over time. And I mean, I'm sure Aidan has encountered this himself. Sometimes going back to properties maybe a year and a half after I first saw them, you can see progressive deterioration in them, and as Corinne just said, that is potentially going to happen for many years to come. So I think it's about structuring this over a reasonable period of time, and I think potentially that's what the new scheme will or the revised scheme will try and do. If it's successful initially and satisfy everyone, no, it won't. But I still feel that once the government and the housing agency, if they're leading this, engage with people, engage with homeowners, and give them peace of mind, I think it's an awful lot. It'll leave an awful lot of, I suppose, satisfied until the remediation work starts. I think some of this partial remediation stuff, particularly in terms of pyrite, I don't think it's going down the right route. Aidan agrees with me. I know he does, and he has always said that. And I've listened to Aidan on many occasions on forums and Engineering Ireland forums, and it's something we've certainly agreed on. That some of this partial remediation is really kicking the can down the road. I feel that yes, possibly kick the can down the road for the less affected properties, but do the right thing at that time, not a partial remediation. That's just something I want to step in and say.
Thanks, Simon. I'm just very aware now there are a lot of questions on this panel. but we do have to take a short break. We've really run over time in our discussion. So please, we will come back and we will tally all of the questions, and I'm sure hopefully Aidan and Simon and Petrolab will still be maybe there. We can maybe have a second run at these questions.
What time are you coming back on, Martine?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to take about five minutes because Mairead Phelan is due at 15:30, so I don't want to keep her waiting. So literally we're going to have to take a 5-minute stretch, take a walk. Sorry, no, we ran over time on our coffee break. So we'll be back in about 5 minutes.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.